Hi everybody and welcome back to Murder at Bedtime. I'm your host Lyndon. Now, as I always say, if you are a regular listener, thank you so much. You know by now, I think you are all awesome. If this is your first time listening, I hope I can persuade you to return. This is a 15-minute or so true murder bedtime story. It's no frills, waffle free, just me trying to find out as many facts as I can about a case and then squeezing and condensing them all into an uninterrupted bedtime story. The waffle is all at the end, so just switch me off then or listen on to my gobbledygook. And with that, let's get serious and crack on. I would just like to say this is a horrific case with graphic details of mutilation. If you think this might be a trigger, please don't listen to this episode. Tonight's episode, The Devil Lived in Wath. Now, I'm assured by my mum, who is a Yorkshire lass from Bridlington, that it is pronounced Wath. This is the story of Anthony Paul Arkwright, a sadistic British spree killer, but relatively unknown even here in the UK. So we'll start with Mrs. Law was just popping round to see her son Marcus, as she did every day, just to see if he needed anything. 25-year-old Marcus had been disabled in a hit-and-run car crash on his motorcycle when he was 19 and was confined to a wheelchair. He lived in a specially adapted flat on Denham Road in Wath on Dearne in South Yorkshire. As she approached her son's flat, a very tall young man with spiky hair, who she knew only as Tony, a neighbour of her son's, swaggered towards her smiling. As he got close to her, he matter-of-factly said, "Sorry about poor Marcus, he's killed himself." Mrs. Law hurried on to her son's flat, where she let herself in and saw a sight that no mother should have to witness. Her son Marcus had been stabbed 70 times, his stomach had been cut open, and one of his crutches had been forced into his stomach cavity. His eyeballs had been gouged out, and unlit cigarettes had been placed in his eye sockets, in his ears, his mouth, and one nostril. His killer, when caught, said this was done for all the cigarettes that Marcus had scrounged off him in the past. Now, this unbelievably was the last of 4 murders that this killer had committed in the last 56 hours, and the other 3 had not even been discovered yet. So now we need to go back to where and when it all started, and who is the devil who lived in Wath. Well, that man was a 6'5" spiky-haired 21-year-old young man called Anthony Paul Arkwright. He was born in 1967 in Wath upon Dearne. He was the middle child of 5. His mother abandoned them when they were very young, and their father, a coal miner, just couldn't cope with it. So a lot of Arkwright's time was spent in care homes. He did very badly in school, so it wasn't long before he fell into criminal ways. He had been in Borstal, or juvenile detention, and had already been in proper prison for 6 months for burglary. While in prison, he had developed a very unhealthy obsession with Jack the Ripper and Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. He read up on anything he could get his hands on about the pair. When he was released, he liked to brag to anyone who would listen that one day he would be more infamous than them both. Upon his release, he managed to secure a council flat on Denham Road, Wath, and he got a job at a scrapyard in the nearby town of Mexborough, 2.8 miles away. But Due to his bad attendance and his bad attitude, on the 27th of August 1988, the management dismissed him. So Arkwright took his severance pay and hit the bars and pubs of Mexborough. By 4:15 p.m. that afternoon, murderous thoughts about killing his maternal grandfather had started to surface in Anthony's head. For some reason, he believed wrongly that his grandfather was in fact his father due to an incestuous relationship with his mother. It drove Arkwright to walk round to his grandfather's house. Finding him not at home, he walked another mile to his grandfather's allotment, where 68-year-old Lithuanian-born Stasis Podokis was tending his vegetables when he turned to greet his grandson. Before he could react, Arkwright stabbed Stasis in the neck so hard that it severed his spinal cord, instantly paralysing him, and he fell to the floor. Arkwright then dragged him into a small shed where he hit him in the chest with an axe, leaving it embedded there. He then smashed his grandfather's skull in with a 14-pound lump hammer. He then returned to his grandfather's house on Ruskin Avenue. While stealing his grandfather's £3,000 savings and other items, he was disturbed by Stasis's housekeeper, 72-year-old Elsa Conradite. He killed her with an axe to the head, then left the property. He returned to Mexborough's pubs, where he could hardly contain his joy or his tongue, bragging about what he had done, telling one barman that it's been murder on the allotment today. So nothing wrong with his sense of humour then. But most people, knowing Tony Arkwright, hadn't taken much notice. Eventually, he made his way back to Wath, where after having more to drink, he decided to take revenge on his neighbour for reporting him to police for stealing his microwave and clock, amongst other things. He had terrorised this poor man for ages, and he was an easy target. 45-year-old Raymond Ford was an ex-teacher who had worked for many years in Burma, where he contracted a rare disease. He was forced to retire and live on a pension. He was an alcoholic and a manic depressive who lived as an almost recluse in his squalid flat, only venturing out for cheap cider and a newspaper, and presumably food at times. Arkwright had broken this poor man's windows and forced dog feces through his letterbox in the past. At 3 a.m. on Saturday the 27th of August, Arkwright took his bullying to another level. He entered Raymond's flat, either naked or in his underpants, whichever report you believe, and wearing a Prince of Darkness devil mask. He stabbed Raymond at least 250 times. He disemboweled him and draped his entrails around the room like bunting and scattered his organs throughout the house. Arkwright spent about an hour mutilating Raymond, then returned home, showered and went to bed. He awoke early next morning to the police knocking on his door to take him in for questioning about the burglary of Raymond Ford. So at this time, Arkwright had murdered 3 people, and one of those was laying just next door. Arkwright was questioned at the station for around 3 hours before being released on bail to appear at magistrates the following week. Straight away, Arkwright, amazed at being a triple murderer that had been able to walk out of a police station, headed back to Mexborough and the pubs and bars. In the early hours of Sunday the 28th of August, he was back in Wath and decided that his other neighbour, Marcus Law, had to die for all the cigarettes he had scrounged off him in the past, which now brings us full circle. After Marcus's mother had discovered her horribly mutilated son, she contacted the police, and Anthony Arkwright was arrested very quickly. He was taken to Raw Marsh Police Station. While he was being questioned, and there are different stories, the story goes though that Arkwright took a pack of playing cards out of his pocket. Now, Detective Inspector Bob Meek says that Arkwright was given the playing cards to while away the time in between interviews. In any case, Arkwright withdrew the 4 of hearts and showed it to the policeman in the room. He told them, "I can read the future from these cards. This is the MasterCard. It means that you have 4 bodies and a madman on the loose. I can see Marcus Law, but the others are indescribable. They are just too horrible to describe." The police didn't know what to make of this. How many murders were there? Arkwright at the time was denying that he had killed Marcus Law, but they knew he had done it. But they also knew he was thoroughly enjoying himself, toying with them. He was at last what he had always wanted to be, a serial killer. Actually, he was a spree killer. And he was the centre of attention. At this time, it was decided to do a follow-up with Raymond Ford and tell him Arkwright had been arrested regarding his burglary. PC David Winter went round to Raymond's flat, and getting no answer, he entered via a window that Arkwright had broken with a dustbin just the night before. The central heating and the TV was on, and eventually, picking his way through the filth and rubbish-strewn flat, PC Winter found the body of Raymond Ford. Now, the police were taking Arkwright seriously, but he wasn't talking. It was 6 days later that the decomposing bodies of Stasis Padokis and Elsa Conradite were found. Arkwright was charged with 4 murders, but he wanted to stay in the spotlight, so he invented a fifth murder, wasting days of police time as they dragged rivers and did searches, etc. An interesting little story I found while trawling the newspaper archives was in a local paper that reported while in the cells in Raw Marsh Police Station, the fire brigade had to be called when Arkwright got his head stuck in the hatch of his cell door, and they had to cut him out. He must have had a very skinny head. He was sent to Hull Prison to await trial. He didn't feel he was getting enough respect or recognition, and that he deserved more. So he started staging dirty protests. If you don't know what a dirty protest is, it is where the prisoner smears his excrement all over his cell walls. Lovely. He next changed tack and claimed he was insane. He was evaluated by a number of psychologists at Rampton Hospital and found to be sane. The chief psychologist stating that Arkwright was the sanest person in the building. In July 1989, at Sheffield Crown Court, Anthony Paul Arkwright pled guilty to the 3 murders of his grandfather, Stasis Padokis, Raymond Ford, and Marcus Law, but for some reason he wouldn't take responsibility for the death of Elsa Conradite. He said he remembered standing over her holding an axe, but would not admit to killing her. The court accepted this as they had him for the three murders and allowed it to stay on file. Mr. Justice Boreham sentenced Arkwright to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he serve 25 years. Arkwright showed no emotion as he was led away. In 1990, then British Home Secretary Jack Straw reviewed Arkwright's sentence and declared it too lenient and increased it to a whole of life tariff. In 2013, Arkwright and another horrific killer on a whole of life sentence, Arthur Hutchinson, appealed with the help of the European Court of Human Rights. The appeal was denied. Sadly, there was one other casualty of these murders in 2002, when it was reported that 14 years after the murder of his son, Marcus, Tony Law had taken his own life in a fume-filled car. He could never get rid of the nightmares and the feelings that he should have protected his son in some case, which of course he couldn't. He was only 62 years old. Well, that was a horrific case, and I don't know about you, but I can't believe I'd never heard of this case or of Anthony Arkwright. Anyway, this is the time when I say good night to the people who are turning me off and going to sleep, and to the ones who are staying on for a bit of waffle. Here it is. If you've enjoyed this story, please rate and review. Apparently, it really helps. I have no idea how algorithms, etc. work, but apparently, even if you give me 1-star reviews, it still helps. I've got a great friend called Trev. We've been mates for many years, and he thinks I am annoying. And my voice is so boring that he actually puts my podcast on if he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's back to sleep in minutes. Now, if you feel that way, please let me know. I'll read it out in this bit of waffle bit. Anyway, one of my favourite true crime podcasts is Twisted Listers. Cindy and Diva are not only lovely people and very supportive to me and other independent true crime podcasts, but every week bring out an amazing podcast of their own, where they both bring out a list each of killers on a chosen topic, then do half on Tuesday and half on Wednesday. They also have a Patreon channel where for $1, yep, $1 a month, you can get single special episodes and Diva's murder maps. I love them, and I'm sure you will too. So please check them out. Twisted Listers, find them on Instagram and on all podcast platforms. And lastly, Debbie Q, who is now Debbie Sue of The Right Shoe. It all rhymes. She was a poet and she never knew it. Podcast and myself will be doing another collaboration in the near future, and this time it will be a British murder. So I will let you know when this is coming out. Finally, thank you as always to Jonathan Seager for the continued use of Cursed Lullaby as my intro. And with that's it. It's time for bed. Thank you for listening on. Sleep well. Hope my voice didn't make you mad as a box of frogs. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Night night.